Good evening, dear friends. I have a sore throat even though I have to go back to Bratislava to the government office again. I know that Bratislava will immediately grant me 5 days off, but the demanding sports program consisting of miles of swimming and exercises will undoubtedly postpone the next operation after the attack. I am like glue to flies for the anti-government and anti-Slovenian media. And journalists are really annoying like flies even here on vacation. They are funny and at the same time annoying when they transport me to the shore while swimming. And if I swam the same route 100 times, they would pass it 100 times, just to be able to take pictures and start with stupid questions. And then they also make it difficult for the locals, for whom 99% do not know who is the Slovak chairman of the government, as 99% of Slovaks do not know who is the Prime Minister of Croatia. I understand that the anti-government and anti-Slovenian media need to cover up the scandal of obedient Slovakia, when it turned out that in the pre-election campaign in 2023, we took doping paid by the British government. Cyclist Armstrong also doped on the Tour de France, but he won us. These barbarians ended up only in the middle of the Slovak political peloton. I do not understand why our opponents in the media and in the opposition believe that it will help them if they literally terrorize me on vacation. They have already visited the Croatian disaster of inevitability 100 times, where they did not find anything, because I did not buy anything in this country. They bothered the local representatives 100 times, from whom they did not learn anything. I have publicly stated 100 times that I do not own any inevitability in Croatia, and that I live in private property, as 10,000 other Slovaks do. If I want to buy something in Croatia, I will buy it. Many beautiful inevitabilities are cheaper here in Croatia than living in Bratislava for 2 weeks. For a house owned by the NKVD journalist Todova, practically without receipts, I would have a beautiful villa here in Croatia. Truth and objectivity are unknown terms for anti-Slovenian and anti-government media. They only know hatred and obsession. Really imagine that a foreign prime minister would come to Ližov to Tatiae, and he would be in a nice private villa. And as flies, the journalists from a given country would fly around him, only to mock that he belongs to a villa, and they would emphasize the local Slovak, so that they would say something to the Prime Minister, even if they did not know who he was talking about. I believe that someone who lives here in Croatia will not lose his nerve in these Slovak journalistic and opposition adventures, and will not do himself a favor. You can imagine what would happen next. I have good news for the journalists. In a moment, I will be permanently in Slovakia again. You do not have to travel behind me and change the sources of your editorial office to annoy me. At 6 a.m., you will always find me in Bratislava, and then until 8 p.m. in the office. Dear friends, I consider it a great political mistake that the voice of social democracy, with its communicative incompetence in organizing tenders for refugees, directly bought out the opposition, namely Poslušné Slovensko, from the scandal surrounding the influx of Slovak voters in the year 2023 by the British government in the obvious success of Poslušné Slovensko. In other words, Mladý Šimečka is so simple that the use of the name Poslušné Slovensko instead of Progressive Slovensko is considered my mistake. But where is the mistake? The politicians on this side are without any doubt a league of obedient, a league of insubordinate servants of foreign interests in Slovakia, supported by their money from foreign governments. And instead of squandering in their own pockets, the Ministry of Health, ruled by Voice, will put roasted chickens on their plates. Well, have a nice meal, even if they serve it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which is, of course, a huge damage to a given coalition side, but also to the entire ruling coalition. The tender for refugees must be immediately cancelled and reorganized again. And I am even more curious how the Voice will cope with the proposal of the chairman of the Slovak National Party, Andrea Danka, that the entire refugee system should be state-owned and thus save decent money. I am a metatist and I recognize the strong role of the state. Look, a minute before 12 o'clock, we stopped the privatization of the strategic airport in Bratislava and left it in the hands of the state. The airport is also developing in state ownership. Why shouldn't it be the same with a rescue system where private companies play along? For some time now, we can offer licenses to end partners and create enough time and space to consider what to do next with this extraordinarily lucrative part of Slovak healthcare. The cancellation of the tender for refugees is also temporarily important due to the start of the ruling parties on the budget for 2026. The agreement will be very demanding, primarily due to the volume of unnecessary savings, but also from the political point of view of the individual ruling parties. Again, I will say it very simply. Either we agree in the governing coalition, or we create a chance for the government of the League of Obedient Servants, which will take Slovakia and its social system apart. Just as the outgoing Prime Minister proposed in 2023, economic miracle of obedient Slovakia, Mr. Ludovít Odor. We all know the two basic words of say, which characterize the program of the current opposition. In one word, Mladi Šimečka said, to damage, and in the other, to close, above the shooting Democrats, to damage the state and to close the opponents, to damage and to close. This is exactly what Slovakia really needs today. The governing coalition definitely does not want to dismantle the social state so that we can find the sources for consolidation and the origin of the billions. How precise is the new tax forecast, and is it our decision to what extent we will compensate the prices of energy for Slovak households? We know that in the governing coalition there is an agreement that we will not raise taxes on arms. I believe, however, that there will be an agreement to raise taxes on projects financed by the Ministry of Defense, such as the construction of hospitals or other good infrastructure projects. As far as energy is concerned, I have already announced that after talks with the Minister of Finance, Václav Kamenicki, and the Vice President of the government and the Minister of Economy, Denis Sosakov, we will propose a coalition council, a proposal to compensate the price of gas and heat for 90% of Slovak households. In the case of electricity, the same price in 2026 guarantees us a signed memorandum with Slovak power plants. It is quite shocking how the opposition and the Slovak media rushed to this compensation proposal. They say it is wrong, that we need more addressability, that households are able to pay a higher price for energy, and so on. But at the same time, Slovak households are doing a good job. We are not, I beg your pardon, head over heels, and we know very well what is behind this opposition and media disagreement. They believe that because of the consolidation of devastated public finances, which will end in 2023, we will not be able to compensate the price of energy and that it will not harm us politically. I am still convinced that the absolute majority of Slovak households need help when it comes to energy supplies. It is still true that the dominant force in the government is social democracy. Stable energy prices must be among its key program priorities. In addition to this, stability in energy prices is also essential in the fight against inflation. To be precise, dear friends, I asked for data from the Ministry of Economy what would happen in 2026 if we did not start compensating the price of gas and heat. Let's start with heat. In 2025, the price of 1 megawatt compensated by the government will increase by 139 SU. If we did not start the proposed compensation in 2026, the price of heat would increase from 139 SU to 180 euro per MWh by 33%, i.e. one-third. In the case of gas, the price compensated by the government in 2025 at 63 euro per MW it increased by 85 euro, which is an increase of 34%, i.e. more than one-third. And in the case of electricity, if the memorandum between the Ministry of Economy and Slovak power plants were not signed, electricity would increase by 29% in 2026. Are we really not supposed to notice a third increase in energy in social democracy? No, definitely not, and I will strongly emphasize the compensation. However, let it be clear today, without any doubts, what the government of obedient servants would do with energy. And this also applies to the two-way street, where anti-government media and the opposition claim to be too generous. Dear friends, of course, we all know that we are all following the trend around the meeting of the American and Russian president, scheduled for August 15th next week. I would like to go back to what the direction of Slovak social democracy and truth had in evaluating the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, in practically everything. Everyone already knows that the conflict has its serious roots in recent history, that it has no military solution. Everyone already knows that Ukraine's membership in NATO is impossible. Everyone already knows that Ukraine was used by the West to try to weaken Russia, which failed. And for what will Ukraine have to pay a high price? Remember the old African truth, which I like to repeat so much. It does not matter whether elephants fight or have sex, grass always suffers. Let the elephant mating on August 15th happen as it pleases. Grass will suffer, in this case, Ukraine. Ukrainian political leaders are responsible for this state to a certain extent, because they let the West attract them and fully supported the unsuccessful Western strategy to harm Russia through all possible support of Ukraine in the military conflict. At the same time, it is generally known that the war could end in April 2022, so 2 months after its beginning. Only several Western politicians defended it with their own bodies. What will happen in the coming weeks will not be nice. However, the most important are two things. First, to agree to immediately stop military operations and end the senseless killing of Slovaks. And secondly, so that other Western players do not throw food into the accidental agreement of the Prime Minister. In any case, the war will end once. And then you will see, as all those who shouted at the Russian Federation, that the worst words will flow into this huge country, and there will be business opportunities. However, I would be most pleased to see those who in the European Union will be able to stop the Russian energy supply. I believe that this day will come very soon, and I am most pleased that we in the direction of Slovak social democracy will be able to look at each other straight in the eye, because from the very beginning of this conflict, we have denied propaganda, lies, and focused on objective information, and above all, on measures. Let's support the Russian and American president to find a meaningful solution. Good evening, dear friends.